Welcome to Faith and Freedom, an audio feature produced by the Wagner Faith and Freedom Center located on the campus of Spring Arbor University. The Wagner Faith and Freedom Center serves as the nation's academic voice for faith, family, and freedom. And now here's your host for Faith and Freedom, Professor William Wagner.
Welcome back to Faith and Freedom. I'm your host, Professor William Wagner. Today we're going to tackle, it's a really interesting topic because it involves Gen Z and the divide of the Gen Z generation between men and women. You know, they are very divided spiritually, they're very divided politically, but what does the Bible say? The Bible says we're supposed to be in relationship. And so if we're going to talk about Gen Z, this old guy is going to get out of the way and we're going to bring in some of the best and brightest again from Spring Arbor University. We've got again with us, we've got Roman and we've got Murph and we've got Salvatore Biondo. So let's get right to it. You guys, you are of that generation. How come we are so divided politically? We're divided spiritually, and that's something that's true about the country, but it's particularly true about your generation. What's going on here? Give me some statistics.
Sure. Well, I ran these a little bit ago, and in regards to Christianity with Gen Z, on paper, it looks bad, but, hang with me because I'm going to give you some stuff that's, it's not hopeless, okay? So on paper, about 45 to 54% of people in Gen Z identify as Christian, which is the lowest generation in American history, like the lowest identification in American history. Looks bad, right?
Yeah.
But you got to, couple it with a couple other things. Okay, Axios put out a report recently saying that, within the 20th century, on average, you have each decade getting less Christian in America than the next. In the 1970s, there's about 63% of Americans identifying as Christian. 1980s, it was about 53%. 1990s, 46%. But with our generation, what's interesting is that leveled out between the babies born in 1990s and those born in 2000, our generation. There's no drop. Okay, so it's still at 46%. Some stats say 54%. So if you want to look at it as a slight uptick, then, I say we're in good shape. And, you can couple that, too, with stuff put out by recently by the Barna Group. They look at Gen Z and all generations before them in regards to church attendance and church commitment. Yeah. And what they found was that Gen Z is actually the highest in church attendance. They've attended about 1.9 on average per month. I know USA Today put out a poll saying that I think about 23 services a year was the average for the Gen Z. So that's higher than all the older generations. So
that's encouraging.
Yeah,
it's higher.
It is, yeah.
You want that number to be bigger, but that's encouraging.
Right, and especially with the decline, we've leveled that off. We're not decreasing like previous generations.
Well, those are powerful numbers, and they challenge that presupposition that appears to be out there sometimes that Gen Z is actually walking away from the faith. And so Murphy and Roman, you're on the ground, so to speak. What do you see happening among your peers spiritually?
Yeah, you say we're on the ground. I'll say I'll agree with you to a point. We're on the ground, but we're not on the ground quite like somebody who's going to a secular university. There are, I would say that the majority of people at this school would at least profess to say that they're Christians. So the number of Christians, it might be declining or whatever the statistics say, but I also want to go back to what Jesus says, and when he says that the path is narrow and the laborers are few. So we will say that. I mean, it is a tough thing to get to heaven. It's tougher for a rich man to go to heaven than it is for a camel to get through the eye of the needle. So I just want to set that framework. But yes, I think that Gen Z is looking for something. It seems that there's so much information out there. There's so many different creators or influencers who are at least...
are they spiritually hungry?
Oh, 100%. I mean, there's just I always like to say there's a Jesus-sized hole in everyone's heart, and everyone's trying to find it. So the fact that they're at least trying Christianity is very encouraging.
Yeah, I think in our generation that people aren't really looking for a surface level religion or like empty tradition like it could have been maybe in the past. They want to see something that transforms lives and is lived out in a meaningful way in each person's life, just beyond I go to church and then that's it. I live the rest of my life just the way I want. They want it, the way you act on Sunday, to be lived out also throughout your daily life every single day.
Yeah. And so if your generation is spiritually hungry, but they also seem to be spiritually conflicted. And I loved your answer with what may be driving them toward being more spiritual. But what do you think is driving the conflicted part, the part where we're dividing ourselves among men and women, having different perspectives with regard to, whether we want to follow God or not, or whether we are politically far to the left or politically leaning to the right? And we'll get into the politics a little later, but what's driving this conflict, do you think?
Yeah, it's so tough because it seems, obviously, we all have an understanding that men and women are different.
Yeah, so there are societal pressures that are forcing the conflict. When ideas that are, not necessarily consistent with, biblical truth become part of the societal pressure, that could, and does it seem, create conflict, often sometimes between men and women, or at least among, the Christians within a non-Christian, society. And so, but biblically, Jesus shows compassion for wandering generations, and in Mark 6, he says, he saw the crowds and felt compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So I'm wondering if Gen Z, Sal, is often feeling that way, less, because I want to move to the political divide that seems to be out there between, men and women of your generation. But before we get there, let's just stop for a moment. And what does God say about, what do you think about God's talking about and showing that compassion to a wandering generation?
Yeah. I think, so earlier we talked about how there's that leveling off going on with Gen Z and not declining. I think one of the things that's driving that is, we've seen what the world has to offer, especially through recent events, a lot of turmoil throughout the world. And it's not enough. You can't just live in the world. There has to be something more. I think that, and I can't confirm that's everyone's motive. I can't confirm that's the reason for Christianity leveling off, but at least with the conversations I've had, people are sick of the world, and Jesus said, we're supposed to be, in the world, but not of the world, right? So I think that contributes at least to that leveling off.
Yeah. Well, and there certainly is, because I do want to move into that the gender divide in your generation in the area of politics, and what I want to do now, though, I guess, is since we are experiencing that largest political gender divide, I think, that we've seen in American history, how do we take that and reconcile it with, God that says he creates men and women for each other. He creates us all, in his image, but he's created us, to be together, to complement, to strengthen, and to build each other up. Isn't this just, a political challenge? Where's that political challenge? Is it a political challenge, or is it a relational one? Is it a spiritual one? If you take what God is saying about how he has designed us to be in relationship with each other, but then the world is imposing this conflict, and it's really, really rising to a very large scale in your generation, how do we, first of all, reconcile that divide, and then what can we do about it?
I think just to touch on the divide in general that's happening before we get to the solution of it.
Yeah. Let's look at the numbers.
Yeah. Okay. So with Gen Z, so we're talking adults 18 to 29. This was a study put out by Pew Research Center. Okay. Within men, you had 34% identifying as Democrat or leaning Democrat, 52% leaning Republican or identifying as Republican. With women, you had 58% Democrat or leaning Democrat, 37% Republican or leaning Republican. Those numbers lead us to a 39-point gap between our generation's men and women. That's insane. That's huge. That's double any other. If you take the averages of all the older generations, it's about 20, maybe. We're at almost 40. That's a 40-point gap.
When a generation's men and women are divided and drifting 39 points apart politically, that's not just a problem for elections.
No.
You know, it's a problem for friendships. I think it's a problem for dating, for marriage, community, you know, for calling.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever been on an airplane, you're sitting next to a person, all of a sudden, if you see they're very different politically from you, what happens? You immediately stop communicating because it's easier. Mm-hmm. Well, take that, and now if God wants us to be in relation, but yet we are divided more than we ever have in this country before, a generation intended by God to be together, what's happening? Is there a risk here of our generation breaking apart with all this divide, or am I missing something?
I think
hopefully
it's easy. Well, a thought I potentially have on the why it's gotten to that spot is it's easy to blame social media, which I think that definitely has a big influence on it, because you have a lot of men influencers in the conservative realm having their target audience of men, and then you have women influencers maybe on the left side speaking to that group. And social media, they'll feed you just that. They'll feed you just this.
It's like an echo chamber.
Right. So you're only hearing those voices over and over again, and then eventually that starts to become what you believe as well, and then it just grows apart. That's just one thought that I had on it.
Well, beyond social media, I don't know, you go into any social situation, and I'm sorry to be beating up on you guys, on your generation right now, but when I see your generation in a social situation, they're doing this. And even if they're in a very social, like communal situation, they're talking to each other
Using
in a
the phone.
way that eliminates the requirement for relational connection. And so how much is technology and social media a problem? Maybe it's bigger than we think. What can we do to, have a practical way to change some of that maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough thing because we're just so almost reliant on it. We're reliant on it to be able to communicate. I know I rely on my phone. I call my parents about every night, right? Like, that's something I rely on. So when I have that reliance, then I rely on it for other things, right? Like, and then when it becomes you're reliant for communication with people that you're like within a room with, or when you're reliant on it for your only source of entertainment. I mean, I would imagine if we looked up Gen Z's reading numbers, they wouldn't be reading nearly as many books as your generation would.
Yeah.
I think it really shifted too after the 2020s with COVID. When everything got locked down, we became very reliant on technology.
Oh, yeah.
Everything was shut down. I mean, all the classrooms were virtual. Mm-hmm. We were living in like a virtual world. Everything shifted that way. And I think, I don't know, on one hand, that could contribute to the lack of, all the communication problems, you're seeing. I think, though, you can maybe find a bright light in that darkness, because it kind of showed people that that's not all there is in life. At least with me and some of the people I've talked to, like, it's just not enough. Like, we went through that whole, experience, and it's it wasn't fulfilling at all. You need more. You need Jesus. So maybe that's,
Well,
I don't
just the fact that we see we need to rebuild trust and unity between young men and young women, perhaps especially inside Christian communities and inside the church. And I like where you're going here, because for me, it sounds like we're heading toward a practical, let's shift to a practical biblical hope. Because if we put our trust in technology, I don't think it's going to, move the needle and bring men and women back into more like-mindedness or even more into relationship. But if we shift to, a biblical type of hope, maybe we can find an answer, at least for Christian people. So the beautiful thing about Christianity is that it doesn't just, show us the division. It offers a cure. God designed men and women in his image, and he desires us to flourish together. and so Ephesians 4 calls us to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And Jesus prayed in John 17 that his followers would be one. He wants us to be in unity. He prayed that his followers would be one so that the world would know him. And I think the church can lead. And when I say the church, I'm talking about the body of Christ. I'm talking about us here at this table and at Spring Arbor University. We can, I think, lead in this healing, in this rebuilding of trust. Sal, we're doing some things here at the Faith and Freedom Center. You want to share what that is and maybe how that could help in this area?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think even with you guys are both Faith and Freedom Fellows, on a weekly basis, at the Faith and Freedom Center, our goal, we're trying to put out resources to reach all people, especially young people, to rise above kind of the political chaos we're seeing in the world today.
We don't chase the elephant. We don't chase the donkey. We're chasing the lamb.
Right. Yeah. And so, through deep study of Scripture, through deep conversations we have with each other, that's how we change the culture. It doesn't have to be. It can seem hopeless at times, but it doesn't have to be like that. You can change it one step at a time, just with the conversations you have and the hearts you change on a personal, individual level. So,
Yeah, and I think what we do, the fellowship and having just a small group together, that's really impactful, and anyone can do it.
Yeah.
Good. Well, when men and women rediscover God's design, for relationship, for partnership, for families, for friendships, I think the needle begins to move in the right direction, and the healing begins, the rebuilding of trust begins, and I think God will get glorified in that. And so you guys can be the generation that restores unity rather than deepens division. And I'm encouraged because I know men of character like you, and I've met women of character at this university that have that same commitment to having Christ be the center of their life and not have the world be the center and the world's ideas of what is appropriate into the world. So I really, really appreciate the time we've taken here. We're going to move into the final wrap in a minute, but any final thoughts before we go into the final wrap?
No, I think we, at least from my perspective, we hit on everything I would think of.
Yeah, just keeping Jesus at the center of everything. And we kind of went through this last podcast too, prayers should be our number one step here.
Absolutely.
Prayer, that's essential. So before we try to change anything, bring our thoughts, hopes, fears, all of it to Jesus' feet, and that's how we change the world right there.
Fantastic. And when we come back, we'll go right into the final wrap.
Growing deep roots means anchoring yourself to Jesus Christ, the source of all life and learning. Here at Spring Arbor University, faith and academics work hand in hand, grounding you in truth and wisdom. With a close-knit Christian community by your side, you'll grow strong, ready to face life's challenges. At SAU, you won't just learn, you'll thrive. Grow deep roots at Spring Arbor University. Visit arbor.edu today.
And now the final wrap. So today we explored the spiritual hunger inside Gen Z, the forces pulling young people away from their faith, the rise of traditional Christianity, some good things happening, some real serious things we ought to be watching, and especially the striking political divide between young men and women. But more importantly, we took time and we stopped and we looked at the biblical truth. What does God say about men and women? How did he create us? He created us in his very image. And how did he create us for each other? He created us for each other. And so I want to thank Salvatore, Murphy, and Roman for sharing wisdom from that generation. And I am so encouraged when I hang around these guys, because there is hope for this great republic. There's hope for this future. You men are all great ambassadors for Christ. I want you just to keep doing what you're doing. And I want to thank our listeners. And if you'd like to learn more about the Wagner Faith and Freedom Center, visit our website and connect with us. Until next time, I'm Professor Will Wagner for Faith, for Freedom, and for such a time as this.